Hillsdale College has sent many of her sons to war in her history. They have served on battlefields across the country, from Chickamauga to Chancellorsville, and around the world, from Germany to Guadalcanal. However, only one has earned the coveted distinction of ace. This is his story. John Warren Fair was born on November 9th, 1920, in the town of Big Point, Mississippi. At the age of 9, his life, along with those of every other American, changed drastically when the stock market crashed. He, like many young Americans of his age, would spend their formative years surviving the Great Depression. His family moved to Battle Creek, Michigan early in his life, John Fair growing up a Michigander through and through. After graduating high school, John traveled to Hillsdale, Michigan, bound for classrooms at Hillsdale College. He began his studies there in April of 1940. On April 16, 1941, a year later, John left Hillsdale and enlisted in the Navy. On June 2nd, he was made an aviation cadet in the U.S. Naval Reserve. John Fair was shipped down to Florida for aviation school, training in Pensacola and Miami before being commissioned as an ensign on October 12, 1941. He was still early in the qualification process to become a naval aviator when something drastically changed the course of his career. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor rapidly hastened John Fair's flight training. On June 12, 1942, 6 days after the Battle of Midway, John Fair received his wings. He was then stationed first at Naval Air Station Cecil Field, Florida, and then at Naval Air Station Minneapolis, Minnesota, as a training officer. He spent the rest of 1942 and the beginning of 1943 in this capacity, until in September 1943 he was deployed to the Pacific. He first served with Fighting Squadron 13 aboard USS Franklin, then was transferred to VF-80 aboard USS Ticonderoga. It was there where he got his first taste of combat, flying the brand new Grumman F-6F Hellcat. In 1944, VF-80 saw combat in some of the most famous air battles of the Pacific War, fighting the Japanese in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, referred to by some as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, and in support of MacArthur's invasion of Leyte, and the ensuing Battle of Leyte Gulf. During his time flying over the Philippines, John Fair scored VF-80's first kill, shooting down a Japanese Oscar and damaging another. After this engagement, VF-80 was transferred to Ticonderoga's sister ship, USS Hancock. In January 1945, VF-80 and USS Hancock sortied out into the waters abutting mainland Asia and went on a killing spree. The Hellcats of VF-80 bombed and strafed targets in Indochina, Hong Kong, Formosa, and Luzon before receiving orders to sail toward Japan. On February 16, 1945, VF-80 and the air groups of over half a dozen other carriers received orders to strike airfields in Japan. It would be the first carrier airstrike on Japan since the Doolittle raid in 1942.
The United States Navy's Task Force 58 plows through heavy seas to open a full-scale air offensive against the Japanese homeland. As other ships and planes hit the Japanese fleet in the inland sea, these mighty forces strike at the Tokyo area. Over 1,200 planes prepare for the attack. Navy and Marine pilots take off into the instant peril of heavy clouds, rain, and snow. Their air mission itself, across the storm-tossed waters and into the gunfire over Tokyo, is an epic of courage and organization. Planes from 15 to 20 American carriers wing in over Tokyo Bay, fighting off all enemy air opposition to reach the target.
The Hellcats of VF-80 conducted the initial fighter sweep to clear the skies of enemy aircraft before the bombers arrived. Fair and his comrades swept over the Chiba Peninsula, just 25 miles from Tokyo. shooting down any Japanese aircraft that got airborne. Fair had his best day of the war, downing an Oscar and a Tojo, as well as sharing the kills of a Zeke and a Dinah with his wingmen, bringing his total up to 4 kills. VF-80 then moved in to strafe aircraft still parked on the ground at various airfields on the Chiba Peninsula. The Japanese defenders put up a ferocious defense, filling the sky with flak. One pilot called the flak pedestrian, because you could get out and walk on it. Fair, determined not to let the Japanese get their parked planes airborne, dived into the heavy flak repeatedly, without regard for his own life, and strafed the enemy airplanes on the ground. Despite the heavy amount of flak, John Fair managed to keep his Hellcat in the air and returned to the USS Hancock after destroying dozens of parked aircraft on the ground. 47 other pilots were not as fortunate, taken down by Japanese flak and fighters. John Warren Fair would later be awarded the Silver Star for his actions that day. Despite the losses, the raid was a huge success, destroying valuable Japanese factories and destroying hundreds of Japanese aircraft, VF-80 alone claiming 71 kills. Just days after the raid on Tokyo, John Fair and VF-80 conducted ground attack missions in support of the invasion of Iwo Jima, where Marines struggled to root out the Japanese defenders from miles of underground caves and tunnels. John continued to serve with distinction throughout the rest of World War II. His final kill count after the war was 5 aircraft destroyed, making him an ace. After the war, he stayed in the Navy, eventually rising to the rank of captain. He commanded the carrier USS Intrepid on a war cruise off the coast of Vietnam, Intrepid's air group bombing targets in North and South Vietnam in support of U.S. and South Vietnamese ground forces. He retired shortly thereafter. He lived in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, with his family until his death in 1992. While little known today, he is a member of an elite group of aviators. Throughout her history, the United States has only produced 1,435 aces, less than have received the Medal of Honor. Throughout his career in the Navy, John Warren Fair exemplified the highest traditions of the U.S. Naval Service and embodied the Hillsdale College motto of "Strength rejoices in the challenge."